All right, all right, all right. Let's flip this around. All right, here I am. We're live. Nice time. Here we go. So, we're gonna get Hen in here. I think I've got to ask. Here we go. All right. Yes.
We did it.
Hey, how are you,
Hey,
buddy?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for making this happen.
Thank you for being so welcoming and open for this. Really appreciate it. I know it's can be a bit tricky to discuss these topics, but I'm really happy that we can do it, and I think so many people want to hear about that. So thank you for
Yeah.
making the time to do it.
Oh, please. Thank you. Thank you for your work too. I really feel like the sort of narrative with what it is that we do with any sort of Israel advocacy can be really confusing, right? And I
Yeah,
guess I'll just jump right in because I feel like we're sort of always put in this position like you're either for or against, right? Uh,
exactly.
and I think that's always really complicated as well. And, I think, you have a great social media account. Not only is it like fun and informative and smart, but I think that what you say, I think that you articulate things that so many people feel, but we're like not in a position either like intellectually like me or just in general, we're always sort of like one or the other all the
Right.
time. And I think that especially when it comes to things like food or like cultural appropriation or things that inevitably we have to discuss. I think that it was like you can care or love Israel or advocate for Israel and not be anti-Palestinian. And I think that's the big the big sort of question. And I was actually even looking at what your Instagram post announcing this. Uh, and somebody commented and said, "Oh, I watched Michael's documentary, and I thought that he felt like Israeli cuisine didn't exist." And I was
Yeah,
like,
that was one of the questions. It was they asked, if I recall correctly, so one of argued in his documentary that there's no such thing as Israeli cuisine. I would push back on that because many countries' cuisines are composed of wide array of culinary disciplines. So yeah, what would you comment to that?
I mean, I wanted to reach out. I don't normally comment like back
Yeah,
to people on Instagram, but I was like, could you watch it again, please? Because, oh, and also, I mean, like, uh, there's no way, like, tone is really difficult, I think, on
Mm,
social media. So I feel like there's no way that I could say, like, I respectfully disagree. I would probably reach out to that person, and I hope that she's watching too, and say, like, I have dedicated my entire adult life and career to advocating for Israel for food. And,
right.
I think that, I think that that is, I don't think that's correct. And I believe that Israeli cuisine exists and all those things. But I also think that, like, I think that uh, as sort of ambassadors or people that believe in things like equality and equal rights or try to be empathetic for marginalized populations, I think that we also have to like discuss Palestinian cuisine. And I don't think that you know, I don't think that we should be so apprehensive about those discussions. And also for like Arab chefs to be able to talk about Israeli cuisine constructively and say like this is how it makes me feel and the sort of political and social and emotional implications of discussing Israeli cuisine as a Palestinian chef, how that would, like I think those things are very relevant, but I don't think that because I talk about Palestinian cuisine, somehow it makes me like anti-Israel or doesn't.
Yeah.
I believe in Israel. I believe in Israeli culture. I believe in diasporic cuisine. I believe in Israeli cuisine, and this is what I do. So.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I've watched the movie a couple of times actually, and the message is clear. You're saying that it's more complex than just one cuisine. It's not. The answer is that there are many answers, I guess, and I think that we are at a time and age, and that speaking about nuance is becoming very difficult, and people want you to pick a side, and they want you to brand yourself as something, and you can't. You mentioned this Instagram post that I posted that came after. I mean, I think I felt at the same place that you're at, because I do support a two-state solution, and I, just as much as I support Jewish national rights, I can't deny other people from their
Of course.
national rights, and I can't say that, you know, you need to respect Israeli cuisine while erasing other communities and other marginalized groups from their own identity. How do you navigate between those places of being so, you're very outspokenly pro-Israel Zionist. I don't think that was something, I mean, your restaurants are incredible and celebrating Israeli
Thank you.
cuisines. Yeah, I mean, but how do you, where do you find the balance there?
I just didn't think, I guess what is so fascinating to me is that I didn't think that opening an Israeli restaurant would be political, you know? And I remember uh, figuring out what we were going to call this because I don't think Steve, my business partner, and I opened Zahav in 2008, nobody like knew what Israeli food was,
Right,
give you a little context, we were cooking all sort of molecular food, and if you wanted to be a fancy chef, you had a certain path, and
yeah,
you had to plate things a certain way, and so on and so forth. But we were doing all this deconstructing and clarifying and sous vide this and that, and then I'd like go back home and I'd get off the plane and I'd go to like Shchonot Tikva and eat at like Restaurant Busi where it's like
right.
fucking laffa and like kebabs and salatim.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is what we want to eat, right? So then we
Mm.
understand that we had to, that we wanted to open an Israeli restaurant. And then I remember talking to our publicist at the time, and she said, well, don't you think that's like political? And I was like, well, no, what are you fucking talking about? Political? No. Maybe I was naive as well. I mean, there's certain things that certain sensitivities and certain things that I've realized after doing this for a long time. Either being slightly, woke I mean, one of my best friends is Palestinian, and she's an incredible cookbook author, and might as well be my family, right? And I just think that like I wasn't in that position before. I don't know, So I feel like things certain change, and then you understand um, context much better, right? And so for me, and I think I was saying this before, like I grew up in a relatively left to left center family,
Right.
and we grew up non-racist and obviously embraced the idea of self-identification as Jews and Israelis, and wouldn't take that away from like publicly or even idealistically or ideologically against Palestinians or anything like that. But like when I grew up, the word Palestine wasn't used unless it was like a very negative connotation, right? And I
Mm.
said this to you before, and I know this is like as Jews or as Israelis and as defensive Israelis, like it makes you feel a certain way. You have this sort of emotional feeling. If somebody says Palestine or Palestinian, sort of in our circle, or before, let's say 20, 30 years ago,
Right.
it was in reference to like a terrorist or a gunman. It
Okay.
wasn't, we weren't talking about food. Because if we were talking about food, you would say Arab, right?
Right.
And I know that there's a justification for that too. And I know that we can like sit and go back and forth. But even that, even just saying, I've got a very good friend that wrote a Palestinian cookbook. There is something that sort of happens emotionally to you if you are like me growing up in a, Zionist family. So yeah, I just think that like I think trying to be as sensitive to that as possible and also giving like as much context as you can, particularly in the US, where we love to say you're fucking racist or you're this or oh, Israeli restaurant, you must hate Palestinians. Or, I posted once a headline of my friend's Washington Post article that was actually written by an editor. It wasn't even written by her. And it was talking about the way that the term Israeli food and how that for her felt like erasure, And I wrote like, this is my friend, even though we like disagree on things, I'm like proud and so on and so forth. And it was like the craziness, the responses were totally insane because this is emotional and because like, you know, Palestinian chefs and Palestinians in general feel like they've had things taken away from them from Israelis. So of course, if I make a bowl of hummus and people love it, because our hummus is fucking awesome. It probably pisses them off, right? And we could go back and have a political discussion or a history discussion. It just doesn't matter. It's not, I mean, those things do matter, obviously, but when you're talking about something as personal as, sort of family dinners and sort of identification, particularly with a population of people that have, politically or sort of like have issues with that, it gets very sensitive. And I think that I don't know. So I'm not sure exactly, and I've gone off on a tangent, and I've had
Yeah,
way too
no,
much coffee today. But
but I
um,
think what you're touching on is so important, that we need to recognize trauma of both sides, and you're speaking about this trauma that Jewish people have from the history of Palestine and Palestinians, and why these terms are touching a sensitive place, but also what it does to Palestinians. And we should absolutely understand that there's two, it's a bloody conflict. Like, there's no side that hasn't suffered in this conflict,
well,
right?
and also, and then the alternative to that as well is this idea that uh, Israel or like Israeli cuisine is somehow all theft or it's invalid, because that's also
Right,
what we're scared of, right?
right.
And I try to explain this to like non-Jewish friends, and I'm like, I am always like, I feel like we're always a few degrees away from like pogroms or
Mm.
or worse, right? And I don't think so. When you talk about, if you try to invalidate or discredit Israeli cuisine, then what you're also doing is erasing like Jewish diaspora, right?
Mhm.
And you're Iraqi, so like I don't know, like 40% or 50, like an astounding amount of Baghdad at one point was Jewish.
Yeah,
And there are
40%.
no, how many Jews are there in Iraq right now?
Two.
Fucking zero,
Yeah.
right? Two. And they probably have a really rough life, right? So the only place that you can get Iraqi Jewish cooking is now in Israel, or in,
Or in Zahav.
one, or in Zahav, right? Exactly. Or we make kube.
Yeah.
So I get it. But like, that's the sort of flip side to this, is that like diasporic Jewish cooking is only found in a couple places. And what Israel has is not only indigenous food from Palestinians and from Druze and Bedouins and everybody, and Palestinians from West Bank and from Gaza and all that. But what you also have is 100 different gastronomies from all over the world where it doesn't exist anymore. There are no more Yemenite Jews in Yemen, right?
Yeah.
So eating Marak Tamani, with schug and chilbe and eating kubana, like that doesn't exist in Yemen anymore. So the only place that you have that is in Israel, and it is very important. If you deny or say that Israeli food is all stolen, then what you're doing is erasing our history as well. So
Right.
I think that like the easiest thing for me to do is to try to embrace this and try to sit with some really difficult and uncomfortable conversations. I mean, I don't, I think that I know your politics, and I think that we probably agree on just about everything. There is like nobody in my circle that doesn't believe in equal rights in
Right.
general, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when you're looking at certain political situations and dynamics that go on in a country that you love, that we spent our life defending, it is very difficult. I mean, it's you. I don't need to be an apologist for politicians and for lobbyists and lawmakers that I don't agree with, but like we do fall into that role sometimes as well, where you have to educate and defend all the time, and
But I think that also comes from how much we are being attacked and being, and the idea that Israel has no cuisine is just the politically correct way to dehumanize Israelis, to say,
yeah.
those people, they're not people because they're stealing everything. They're stealing the land, they're stealing the culture. And if people have no culture, they're not people, right?
Right. Well, definitely, and that you're just sort of invalidating it and saying that it's made up. And like, although modern Israel is new, it is valid. It's where we're from,
Mm.
and there is a cuisine. I mean, national cuisine in general, and this is something that my friend actually wrote about in her book Arabesque, which is amazing. But you know, na the nation state is like a relatively new concept,
Mm.
especially in the Middle East or in the Arab world, or sort of post-Ottoman Arabia. Like,
Right.
so national cuisine also is like kind of silly. It doesn't, what's the national cuisine of Israel? If you ask
Right.
anybody on the street, it's probably falafel, which is fourth century Coptic Christian, hummus, which is like was probably not invented by Palestinians or Israelis, or maybe it was Lebanese, maybe, but everybody kind of has hummus. Or what else? Shawarma, which was, 16th or 17th century Turkish. So the actual national dish of Israel was jellied calf's foot. I think that was the last
Really?
actual, yeah, and that was some Romanian kibbutznik
Yeah.
shit that nobody eats in Israel. Anyways, but I think about this a lot too, and like there's always this sort of double standard, which I think
Mm,
is like when I defend, I have to be careful as well because I don't. Again, this doesn't go back to like justification of occupation or anything towards Palestinians, but I'm like, why is it that like Lebanon and Syria can have the same national dish and
mhm.
nobody has a problem with that or finds the irony that like because we know that Syria controlled Lebanon for so long and so on and so forth, so they can have fried kibbeh and share it, and yet if I make fucking falafel here, I'm like somehow this like thief. It's like totally backwards. And then like the flip side to that is obviously like if you're a Palestinian that has to wait at 4 hours in a checkpoint or doesn't have equal rate if you're a Palestinian Israeli or whatever, like it fucking hurts, I'm sure, to
Mm.
have some guy that looks kind of, I'm half Sephardic, but I might as well, be white in terms of what people think of me, frying falafel and I'm actually promoting my falafel restaurant right here. Booyah. So I'm sure it sucks. It totally sucks. Yeah, and the Judean warrior is saying it's called anti-Semitism, and that is a good point. It's the double standard is the thing that we're always scared of,
Right.
right? But I think it's very important to recognize kind of where it's coming and where you direct your defense.
Right.
And so like I've never claimed Israel has never claimed to invent all these things. We are very good at marketing stuff, right?
Right.
And food in particular. This is something that I've done for a very, very long time. I guess to me, uh, what I get concerned about is like the fact that, like China, like we're going to order like Chinese food later on tonight. I'm not like, man, the Uyghur Muslims that are all in concentration camps right now, like that, is the thing that I get concerned about too, and that's the thing that we all grow up with our guard up, right? Because we're all
Yeah.
fucking scared. We're all fucking scared of this double standard. But I think that specifically when it comes to things like Palestinian cuisine and Palestinians, sort of in Israel or not, I do think it's important to be able to recognize um, sensitivities, specifically as they relate to the sort of political aspect of what it is that we're talking about. Identification, self-determination, those are things that have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the point that really resonates with me is that, I'm speaking on college campuses. Before COVID, I was going to college campuses and I was sharing the story of coming out as a gay person in the Israeli army and how I was accepted by my fellow soldiers and how it was, the challenges of being an openly queer person in this society, which is not that much challenges compared to other societies.
Of course,
But every time I was trying to speak about it, immediately it was shut down, and people would protest me and say that it's pinkwashing to speak about gay rights in Israel, and that anything positive about Israel must be condemned. And you think if someone from, a gay person from Iran would go to America and start speaking about his experience as a gay person, he'll be celebrated. Anywhere else, it doesn't matter what the policies of a country is. If a marginalized person comes and shares those stories, they usually are celebrated. But it seems like with Israel, if it's personal stories, if it's the cuisine as well, those things are being shut down and dismissed as political. And I think that once this campaign, and you're right when you're saying that we are scared of it, and the reason that we are scared is because of going back to the trauma that we have. But I think I'll take it to another place that the story of the of Israeli cuisine is a story of survival, and you've seen it in the movie, and you spoke about it, about the people that you met and the kitchen that and the food that they were bringing with them. Is this you had your, I mean, I recommend everyone to watch the movie and to go to all of your restaurants, like 100%. But I would say, the question is, has your opinion changed since the movie on Israeli cuisine, or is it pretty much the same answer, or that that it's not just definite?
I believe no. I mean, even when we shot the film, I believe that there is Israeli cuisine. I've never not. I mean,
Right, right, right. Yeah.
No,
But it's
that is never.
diverse one, right?
It's diverse, absolutely. Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. No, no, no. Israeli cuisine is it is what 100 different gastronomies in the same place,
Yeah,
right? It is indigenous food. It is diasporic food, but not just from the different countries, because we've got laws of kashrut that make it different. We've also got Shabbat, right? And
right.
we've got holidays. So in every, if whether it's Polish, whether it's Moroccan, whether it's like Balkan, like either Greece or sort of like post post Spanish, right?
Right.
You've got dishes that have to be prepared on Friday that eat on Saturday, right?
Right.
You've got cassoulet, which I think was actually also stolen as well.
Yeah.
Like cassoulet and fish and chips. Sephardic Jews should have fucking
They
trademarked that
brought
shit.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of appropriation, right? So
Well,
you've
that's
got
because
all
the
the
British people have nothing of their own. They had to steal everything from
yeah,
us.
but you know what I think
I'm
is
kidding.
okay.
I love my
So no,
British
no, no.
people.
Wait though. Wait. Let's get back to Britain in 1 second. So you've got all those different things, right? All the different
Mhm.
Jewish cuisine. Then you have the Palestinian cuisine. You've got Druze, Levantine North. You've got Gazan, like which is Egypt and South. You've got North Africa, and then you've also got this convergence of the spice and the silk root. You've
Right.
got ancient and modern agriculture and winemaking. You've got the Red Sea, you've got the Sea of Galilee, now you have people harvesting salt from the Dead Sea, and you've got the Mediterranean, and you have
Yes.
snow, and you have like dairy making in the south, you have Nabatean agriculture coming from floods that happen once a year. Once Nabateans were in control of the spice route. I mean,
Yeah.
they had to make the desert bloom, and we're reviving that as well. That is what Israeli cuisine is. It only happens in one place, and the
Right.
place is the size of fucking New Jersey, and it is like ridiculous. It is excellent. So I've always felt that way,
Mm.
but I think that like obviously I was asked to be in the documentary, which is incredible. I have to say that of I think I know Israel very well. I know Israeli food very well. We were there for 3.5 weeks shooting. I would say that like 75% of the places that we went to, I had never heard of before. And
Mm.
that to me is what's so fascinating, you know? So, but Chen, those I've never changed. That's always
Yeah.
been what it
No,
is.
I mean, I actually the point I was asking is you know we're Israeli cuisine today is some if I look at Zahav's menu, like it's very Middle Eastern. Of course, Israel is in the Middle East, and majority of Jews in Israel are descendants of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. But in the movie, you did mention that Ashkenazi food was not something that you weren't as focused on with your cooking, and that's what I
Well,
wanted to get at.
so Ashkenazi food is fantastic. I mean, I grew up, so I'm like half and half. My dad
Yeah.
was like Sephardic Bulgarian. My mom was,
Mm.
like Lithuanian Russian, but American. And I think Ashkenazi food just gets a really bad rap. I mean, there's
Yeah.
really good Ashkenazi food. But what is
Mm.
interesting is that most of what we're exposed to in North America, and actually alternatively in Israel, are from people that are fleeing with nothing, right? So like whether it's like foraging for like mushrooms and berries or goose fat, right? Which you actually still see in Budapest. That's like one of
Mm.
the rare exceptions. Like Jewish food in Budapest is like a thing. Like it's a cool thing. And the way that they treat geese is the way that like we treat like pork. It's like the fat is rendered, the liver, the hanging miss. I mean, it's like really awesome. But everywhere else, it was like they were like fleeing like persecution. They had nothing. North America didn't have, unless it was like Delhi, I guess, in Montreal. But there wasn't a lot to it, and that's why I think it gets such a bad rap. But I do like Ashkenazi food. We have a restaurant called Abe Fisher, which is Ashkenazi, and it's like North American and Central European as well. And I think that we make fantastic food. We always have this issue though. People think it's always heavy, or that you should like that there's like no vegetables also, which is like
Yeah.
totally false. But no, I think that there is fantastic Ashkenazi food, and I think that this next generation, because Mizrahim, even Israelis 20 years ago that wanted to be chefs would leave Israel and they'd go to like France or they'd go to Japan and they'd come back to Tel Aviv and open like a French or Japanese restaurant. When you have one grandparent that's Iraqi, one grandparent that's Moroccan, one that's Yemeni, one that's Polish. Your Saturday lunch is like way more stimulating than any of this other stuff. And I think that also, but in general, like even in Israel, Ashkenazim like get it kind of a bad rap. I mean, even independence, right? Like
Right.
it was like almost derogatory as well. I mean,
Hmm.
the European Jews, particularly the ones that had escaped the Holocaust, weren't treated super awesome. And like white people in the land of Israel, I don't think totally fit with the narrative of like um, the strong new Israeli, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that, but I think that's changing because I think that like everything else, we want to go back to like where we come from. We don't want to just erase Israeli food. We're not embarrassed to bring, stuffed peppers for lunch anymore to school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We don't have to fall into line. We don't need to I mean, we eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches here. You obviously don't in Israel, but
Yeah.
my dad would make my lunch, it would be schnitzel, with like pickles or whatever. And I was so embarrassed, so embarrassed.
Yeah.
And dude, a cold schnitzel sandwich on white bread is like the best thing ever, But
Yeah.
that goes for everybody as well. The idea to assimilate, I don't think that's what people are interested in, particularly in Israel. They want to go back to what they want to hit the diaspora cuisines. They want to be able to translate and transmit the feeling of eating kube, right? Kube selek in
Okay.
the winter. Like you want your kids to know what that is,
Mm.
you know? And
Yeah,
again, it
I
doesn't,
grew up being as well like ashamed of my grandmother's cuisine, and today it's like I'm I looking back at my childhood, I'm so ashamed of the person I was. I mean, like to think that this is something to be ashamed of, the flavors, the type of dishes. Like I'm telling but that's what really that's another question. Do you think there's this cuisines are being preserved in a way that will continue to generations, or is it turning into something else than what it used to be?
so I think that it is actually being preserved because I think that people realize that they have to hold on to this, right?
Mm,
But I think that when we were talking about and identifying Israeli cuisine, it's the mixture of all of them. It's the
yeah.
schnitzel in kubes in with trina and srug and matbucha, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like Israeli cuisine.
Yes. Yeah.
When you're like driving and on your phone smoking a cigarette, eating a sandwich. So that's Israeli cuisine. So that is existing and that happens now,
Mm,
definitely. And that happens in the States, that happens globally, and that also is happening in Israel. Um, but I think that I do believe and we have a hard time with it here. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but like the idea of Shabbat, I don't mean from like a religious, I just mean like the idea of going to somebody's home and eating, having this sort of plethora of food that has an emotional or sort of spiritual relationship to the time before the ancestry. Like that is something that you get in Israel that is like a very hard thing to hold on to
mm.
outside. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's what it's like for you as well. But going over to somebody's house, I was talking to my really good friend and genius, Adina Sussman. She talks about Shabbat and how it's like it's the one thing that she like sort of can't live without, because there's not a lot of emails and cell phone calls, and you go over and you
Yeah.
eat, and I have this with my really good friend Reem, who's the Palestinian cookbook author too. Like, there's something about going over to somebody's house and eating. There's no like start or stop to any meal. It's just like eating and kids playing, and there could be a grandmother and a baby and a dog and this and that, and there's no like generationally, there's no sort of edits. Like everybody's just kind of together, and that's such a normal thing in Israel. Like going into like a neighbor's and sitting next to a grandparent that you never met before. That is not a
Right.
strange thing. In the States, you would never do that.
Mm.
You would never ever do that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the dream of the Zionists, the early Zionists, that they wanted to create this, secular Jewish identity that you can be. I'm secular. Most of my friends are secular, but we're so religious that we don't even understand. We're doing kiddush, we're fasting on
Yeah,
Yom Kippur. We're so secular, but we're doing all this stuff that for us is like it's part of our identity. But I think that in Israel also you don't have to chase Shabbat. You don't have to chase
right.
the holidays. It's Passover because all the supermarkets are going to close down the chametz and they're going to
Yeah,
put sign on it not to touch it. You don't understand that it's around you, but it's just like Sunday is a day off here, and in America it's just like Christmas is a national holiday. For us, those national holidays are part of our identity. But I think that Jewish religion is important in the diaspora. I mean, now that I live in the UK in London, I make sure that I find that, I mean, I make sure that we're doing kiddush, that we are, you know, that we're keeping kosher at the house, that um, I understand that I need to preserve it to preserve
I
my
know.
identity, right?
I started rapping tefillin like here,
Yeah.
and I'm like not at all. Actually, my tefillin bag is right here on my ledge, right? Like I don't. I mean, I grew up conservative American Jewish, but like certainly
Right.
no more than that. But I do these things. I do these things for that, for preservation. I do them because that's like part of my identity. And even though religious or sort of ideologically, I mean, I could find contradictions in everything that we sort of do. But like, I do this because every time I say the Shema and I say it with my kids, millions of like our people have said it before me, and and I want to pass it on. It means something, you
Exactly.
know?
Exactly. And that's exactly my thinking now that well, we don't have kids yet, but we're talking about having kids one day, me and my partner, and I'm saying like I want my kids to, it's not about Chen and it's not about what's going on or the rabbinical council or whatever it is, like anyway, it's about our history, and that's what I'm trying to pass on. I mean that's what you're doing with your restaurant, and that's what you're doing with your cooking and with everything you're doing. You're such a powerhouse for our people. I have another question that I want to ask. We spoke about Mizrahi cuisine and about Palestinian cuisine, that there is a lot of similarities, and there are many projects that are trying to bring Israeli chefs and Palestinian chefs together. And well, there's two parts to this question. The first one is, do you think it's a good way forward? And if you think it is, what do you see the future is for these two communities regarding food, but also, I mean, if you can give us a bit broader view of this.
I mean, that's a really difficult question, and
Oh yeah,
I wish
sorry.
that I know that you and I sort of spend our days and nights contemplating this. And I think that there's, first of all, like, I think that there's so much pressure kind of on both sides for it
Mm,
to not happen. And that's what I always find to be really suspicious, right?
mm,
Every time I do a public dinner with a Palestinian chef, it's like I get fucking hate or she gets hate or
right.
like
Yeah,
whatever. And you're like, oh my God, is this so difficult?
yeah,
It's just so difficult, right? Um, and the reality is that it should not be. And usually the people
mm,
that are making the most noise, I actually believe it's a relatively small but very, very loud
right.
sort of population. But it is difficult, because what I want to do is like just like you, I want to live a normal life. I want to have a
Mm,
happy life. I want to like be successful. I want to like raise a family, and getting drug into a sort of like very heavy, very, very important political discussion every single time I, you know, like then I get humusi mishu, like it's crazy, right?
right.
On the other hand, what other way are we going to do that? I mean, diplomatically speaking, we have been failed, right? The people that
Mm,
are in charge that should have the best interests of the people that they govern in mind aren't they aren't doing the job. And I'm not saying that
right.
this is like an easy thing to do at all, but I just find it to be kind of ridiculous. And then what we're talking about. So like, do I think that like I'm going to make challah and we're going to like there's going to be like peace in the Middle East? No, absolutely not. But you have to have a conversation. And there is
Mm,
something very human about this. Inviting somebody down, sitting somebody down. I mean, there are so many reasons that you and I um, have been, apprehensive about like having conversations with people, and
right.
sort of the inverse of like we'll just say Palestinian just to make things like easier now, because it's not just Palestinian, it's the Arab world. I mean, the Israel is demonized or the enemy for many different reasons, but like so there's so much social pressure and so much political pressure, and that is like to me what I have the most problem with. And I'm like, I just don't. So like I think that you have to ask why that's happening
Mm,
and why it's so important for people to create, or to not even create, obviously, because the conflict is there, because there is occupation, because there is
yeah.
death, because there is genocide, the Jews have experienced, because there is anti-Semitism, there
Right.
is anti-Islam propaganda everywhere. Those things totally exist, right? But it is our job as Jews, as Israelis, as humans, to be
Mm,
able to like roll up our sleeves and to get rid of this noise, and to
mm,
say that like the things, the Jewish values that we grew up with, that we will pass down to our kids,
right.
have to be about moving things forward, and
Yeah.
have to be about trying to make peace and trying to make progress. And I'm not at all saying that like, I mean, there's a reason there's a reason why these things exist, but it is our responsibility to try to move forward. And if we have to do it through food and through human things like culture and music, then so be it. And you know, 10 years ago, I would have made fun of myself for saying this as well. Another
Right.
American, Israeli, or whatever, thinking they're going to go in there and like create peace, right? With some like surf initiative, skateboard initiative, food.
Yeah.
But I have to ask you, Chen, what is it going to be? What is it going to be that's going to actually change things? And it has to come from the human level, I think. And if food is the way, then let's do it. And we like to eat. And Jewish Israeli is called chop salat katus.
So
What do we call that in Artzot Abrit? We call that Israeli salad. What do they say in Israel? They say
Arab.
Arab salad.
Yeah.
All right, that's the one lesson, dude. It exists. So I do think that it does have to come from us, and I do think that actually a normalization is such a like a I don't mean it in the political context
Hmm.
with
Yeah.
Jews and
Yeah.
Palestinians or Arabs or whatever getting together, but this idea that it would be like acceptable for people that maybe disagree on things politically, that maybe are adverse, right? That
Right.
have very different histories and have imbalances
Hmm.
politically or culturally, have to be able to get together and make decisions for the next generation. It
Yeah.
is our
Understood.
responsibility to do that. It is. It is. So I do think that right, small steps first. Somebody said that. As long as you're taking a step forward, I think that's
Hmm.
fine. It is very difficult, especially with the advent of anything social media related, to get discouraged, and it is a dark, dark, evil world in the anonymous, you know, Facebook or Insta, which you know probably better than everybody else. I mean, listen, for you to be a Mizrahi Israeli Jew that is queer, like I can't even imagine what your DM inbox looks like because we all get it so bad, you know, but I do think it is a small
Yeah.
minority that is just very loud and very adamant. And I think that we should, as a society, really, or as a Jewish and Israeli community, be looking very, very hard and very critically about the people that are trying to throw a wrench into any sort of like discussion that isn't, you know, violent, that isn't like
Right.
confrontational. And those are the things that we have to sort of keep an eye on.
You're so brilliant and you're so spot on. I mean, the idea, like, there's a reason why the Palestinians, out of all the Arab minorities in the region, and the Israelis, the Jews, are being pitted against each other constantly. It's not like there wasn't violence, and I've experienced violence since I was born in Israel, and when I was, when I was 12, when I was almost killed in a terror attacks, and 5 years in the IDF working as a humanitarian officer. I've working with Palestinians in Hebron, Ramallah, and Jerusalem. I've experienced all of the hatred and all of the violence, but I can see that it's not. It doesn't come from the bottom up. It comes from up down. From top
Yeah.
down. There's empires that have interest in continuing this conflict. And as you said, it's really minority voice, and that's how I do my social media. And I keep on reminding myself, that it's not. I know. I remind myself of the Palestinians that I know, like your Palestinian chef friend. That I read a few articles from how she speaks highly about you, and she taught me that actually bagels are actually the roots are from the Middle East, from kach, that my grandmother used to make, and from her I learned that
Yeah.
that's not only that it's Ashkenazi, but it's also in some ways Jewish Mizrahi as well. So it's like
Yeah.
that's the nature of food. But I think this. I agree with you completely, like 1,000,000%. These initiatives, and I the people that are raising their eyebrows about those initiatives. I think they're so wrong. I've seen it happening, and I know that enough. They're saying that it's a drop in the ocean, but the ocean is made of drops, and the more people are doing it, like we'll create a wave that will bring this change. So as a young Israeli, I can tell you that I'm fully with you, and I agree. I have a couple of questions from people that sent us before
Sure.
the live that I want to ask. Um, so, what is your favorite Jewish or Israeli dish?
Mm,
You can choose
I
more
mean,
than
I
one.
don't know. There's so many, right? I mean, I would say that the most Israeli dish ever is sabich, even though I'm sure you're like, that comes from my Tibet. But I mean, that was a dish that was invented in Israel, that was created
Yeah.
in Israel, and that obviously comes from Iraq, which is really just Iraqi cuisine. Is it? God, what is the name? Is it Ora Kiva? What is the name of the Iraqi town that has got uh I don't know. There's like
Oh, Akiva
I don't
is pretty rocky. Like
super
there's
Iraqi, right? Yeah, so I want to like I haven't been there yet, but there's some fantastic Iraqi restaurants obviously in Jerusalem that we go to all the time. But I think Iraqi cooking is like I'm not just saying this because it's like you and I, but it is like oh man, it is so good. So I feel like uh, that story and that sort of like the creation of Sabich is really fascinating and super important.
yeah.
And really the discussion of Amba and the way that it made it from like India to Iraq to
Mm,
Israel, I think is really, really cool. And then eating the haminados, which like Jews have eaten, for
right.
millennia, right? So I think that Sabich would be it. But I mean, to me, like I use borekas a lot as as it's borekas are found obviously everywhere too, but like the
Mm,
story of the Sephardic Jews bringing the dough, batzekole, right? Like to
mm,
and then having it sort of turn into phyllo, being
right.
conquered and controlled by Ottomans who stuffed feta cheese inside of it,
And
and then bringing it into now like on every street corner in Israel. And the fact that it's like from my savta is really important. But I think we were talking a lot about the schnitzel. I mean, I think the schnitzel sandwich
mm,
is a great one, right? You've
yeah.
got you've got trina, which is obviously eaten like everywhere, but was but like more than likely Palestinians taught like Jews to love it the way that we do, right? I mean, but
Yeah.
like Ottomans obviously had it. So you've got that. You've got schlug, which is like Temanite, which is Yemenite, matbucha, which is North African, schnitzel, which is like European, but then became Israelified because they needed to like make it with chicken, like really fast and cheap,
Yeah.
and then amba, which is Iraqi. I think that would be a perfect Israeli sandwich. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Actually, I think you
And I'm
sell me
very hungry.
something.
Yeah.
Where can I order it?
Yeah. At
Um,
at our restaurant Merkaz in
Mercaz.
Philadelphia, you
Okay,
can
that's the
order it. Yeah.
newest one.
Yeah, that's the newest one.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, how is it going? I mean, with COVID and everything,
I mean, it's been a really shitty year, but we're
mm.
gonna be okay. We're making it
Getting
through.
better.
Yeah, so we opened Merkaz and then we opened the Shipudia called Laser Wolf.
Oh,
And Laser Wolf was 5 weeks old when we had to shut down. But we
oh
made it
wow.
through with delivery. We have a lot of outdoor seating and all that stuff. So we're doing well. We opened the Kfar, which is 2 years old now, which is our bakery as well. And then Zahav, Abe Fisher, Goldie, we have three of those, three Dizengoffs, which are like homeless places, and then Federal Donuts, which is donuts, chicken, and coffee. So we have five of
Damn.
those.
And
Yeah,
all and everything is open right now, right?
everything's open. Yeah.
Okay, so everyone should travel there. I'm gonna travel there.
When are you coming, dude? Can you
I,
come and hang out with us, please?
yes,
Come and
please.
hang out in Philly for like a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, if I could get a table at Zahav, I would have planned a
I
trip
think
around
I
it. But
can.
do
I
you know
got you.
someone?
I got you, Sam. Yeah, I got you. I got you.
I have another question on that from Aleph Bet Jewelry on Instagram. They asked, sorry, what does the chef make for himself? Like, okay, so I understand what's your favorite ones, but what do you make yourself when you're hungry? What would be like your go-to dish at
Super
home?
embarrassing.
It's
It's like
probably like,
rice.
yeah,
It's rice, or it's like peanut butter and jelly, or yeah, I don't know. It's nothing that exciting. Cereal usually. I don't know. Yeah.
I have a good friend that is also a chef in Israel, and he's making the most basic stuff for himself, and he
Yeah.
does it. It's a
It's
thing, right?
embarrassing. It's
Yeah.
embarrassing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, Uh, yeah, so I think there's a lot of more questions, but I don't want to keep you. I mean, we should definitely do that again when you have more time.
I
Um,
mean, whatever you want. If you have more questions and you want to ask, let's do it.
yeah, okay. So
Im yesh lecha zman, like I'm here.
but I have all this for you. Oh my God, you're
Thank
crazy!
you.
I'm so privileged to have this conversation with you. In your restaurants, you mastered bringing Israeli flavors into perfect gastronomic experience for your guests. Um, However, in your we discussed that with that you said in the movie that you've ignored sometimes Ashkenazi cuisine, but you mentioned that
Yes.
you're bringing that into many of your restaurants, like one of
Yes.
them, right? Um, just 1 second. Uh, Yeah, so I mean, I think we covered basically everything. I don't want to be more
Well,
repetitive. I would just ask, yeah, sorry.
I want to ask you a question because Europe is obviously really, really different. And we talked a
Mm,
little bit about Britain, and I want to come back to that. And I just feel like there's this sort of like guilt thing that the UK has, right?
right.
Where they like accept no responsibility in any of
Mm,
this, bow out, implicate Israel. You could probably argue that there's like I don't know, there's definitely like anti-Semitism in Europe. There's anti-Semitism everywhere. I get
mm,
it. But I was like really scared. I mean, the last elections in Europe, in England, I was like, wow, Labour Party, I cannot believe people support them at all. This is fucking insane. And then also, um, recently, the acquittal of the man in Paris that murdered somebody. It
Sarah
was an
Halimi, yeah.
anti-Semitic act. Threw her out of a window after smoking fucking pot. I mean, I don't know what world we live in where this is okay. How do you? I mean, how is it for you? I mean, we're looking at. I'm looking at Israel and sort of conflict or the Middle East from the United States, but I do. Yeah, somebody's saying anti-Semitism in the UK is far more tangible than the US. I mean, what what is going on over there, and how do you reconcile with all these things?
Yeah, no, it's very hard. It's very difficult. I mean, for me, the reason that I'm so involved in pro-Israel advocacy and fighting anti-Semitism online and offline is because when I first arrived here from Israel, I've seen all this anti-Semitism. I grew up with different type of anti-Semitism. For me, it was anti-Semitism that my family faced during the Farhud in Iraq and my family faced in Tunisia. My father was forced out with his family from Tunisia because of, Tunisian anti-Semitism. So it wasn't driven from the same type of hatred that you're seeing here from it came from my family experienced it from Arabs and Muslims. And when I was in Israel, I also faced it, the anti-Semitism or the violence that I faced was because of the conflict. But I think in the West, it was more when I came to the West, and I've experienced this, hatred for from white people was something that I faced for the first time, and then I learned more about this, and it's um, I think when the elections here happened in the UK, my partner's Mark is on the left, and most of his friends are Labour supporter. And one of them told me, you need to understand that it's important for us to vote for Labour because we have to take care of social issues in this country. I said, but you understand that majority of Jews, 85% of Jews, were telling them that the leader of Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, is an anti-Semite. So why would you ignore that? But he said to me, it's fine because the Jews have it well, so it's fine for us to focus on saving the country and saving starving kids, even if it's in the price of harming Jews. So that was so shocking for me because that was exactly threw me back to National Socialism, which the Nazis brought with them, and I think that really changed my whole perspective. And that was someone that was very liberal, that was with me. We agreed on everything, on trans rights, on progressive issues, on everything other than Jews. And I feel like, and that's why I'm fighting so hard for progressive, for the left, for where I feel comfortable at, where I know that the right will never accept me as someone that believes in everything I believe in social justice, inequality, in everything that I am, has to be on the left. But then when it comes to Jews, it seems like the left in the West has this blind spot. So I'm not willing to give up. And I know a lot of people have been giving up on the left or saying that we can do without them. We can't do without them. And we have to be part of it. And I think that's why the Jewish community, and the Jewish community should not, like the history of the Jewish community in the West, in America, marching with Martin Luther King, fighting for social justice, Harvey Milk, all of those giants of social justice, Jewish social justice movement, that led such a change. We should respect and honor them by fighting to make sure that their legacy is not forgotten. Is that something that you're also feeling in America?
Well, I guess I get, I mean, I'm always thought I was like relatively progressive, but I guess I also get scared. I mean, we talk about the sort of National Socialism, and I just always, either right or wrong, I am always just worried that like Jews are going to get pushed under the bus, and I
Mm,
just don't, and I don't like want to see that. And the same thing, I mean, this is probably where it comes back with like Israel, where I'm like, it's objectified and it's this sort of instrument, it's the sort of like thing that people discuss. And I don't love, I'm a Democrat in the States, but I don't think that it concerns me. I get concerned about all this stuff, and I think that like the labor leader and then even like some of the hyper progressives in the US, which maybe at one point I could sort of identify with. And I'm like, at what point are you going to like objectify this country that I'm from and use me for some sort of political agenda? And it's the same thing. Like Jews have it so good in the UK, don't worry about it. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, famous last words, right? What usually happens after that? Like, come on, no, no way. So it is a really tricky thing. And I mean, I think that
And
I
not
think
all
that when
Jews
you
are
have,
having it well. Jews we're people like every people. There's some people that make it well and some that are not. But people have like this fixation on, look at all the Jews that made it well. Yeah, but it's still like there's poor Jews and the Jews come in every color and in every in every social and
I
economic
think that
status.
whenever there's like a conspiracy theory or whenever there is like Holocaust denial, and then, I mean, obviously like criticism of Israel that is not like sort of overstated. I mean, listen, like again, if I were a Palestinian in a Czech like that had to, that grew up in Gaza or that had to wait in lines and was degraded or even lived in Israel and was a second class citizen, there's no fucking way I'm going to be like, wow, the UN is really unfair towards Israel. Like, of course not, right? Of course not. You're going to like you feel like you've been wronged and you in a lot of and you have been, right? But I think that the issue that I have, and this is probably for another conversation, but fuck it, we're here together, is like what I want is for the world to see that like perhaps things might be a little bit unbalanced and
Right.
like and the same thing like last year, we were protesting and we were marching for marginalized black community in the US, but very, very quickly I saw a lot of like anti-Israel, anti-Semitic
Right.
stuff happening, and I was like, something about this, and it didn't. I mean, listen, there was an autistic Palestinian that was killed by Israeli police in Jerusalem within the same week as George Floyd getting murdered, right? I mean,
Mm.
these are things that, um, as a Jew and an Israeli and as a human being, I grieve and we mourn,
Of
and like, of
course.
course, this is something that cannot happen, not under our watch,
Mm.
But at the same time, I'm like, uh, I'm not gonna, again, I'm not like an apologist for like the Israeli government at this moment. I don't believe in these
Right.
policies. These are things that I publicly vote against, that I advocate against as well. But you can't just lump an entire population of people
Mm.
together. You can't just boycott an entire country, 67 of which agree with, that are like equal rights openly in the terms that
Yeah.
they vote,
It was amazing to see all those people that are advocating to boycott all Israelis because of our government in the last 4 years, saying that fighting against Trump, but not seeing that the double standards of saying to us, to Israelis, this is your government, this is who you are, all you, and even Jews, why are you representing the Israeli government? Why I have friends here that are telling me every time someone finds out, and I faced it also as soon as, but I'm Israeli, so immediately I'm an Israeli agent, but even Jews in Britain need to be defenders of Israel. Why? I mean, why is that it's not your position?
Right. Right. I mean right, exactly. And you're like, I don't make policy when Trump was in power here. They're like
Mm.
things that again we're like anti. And the idea that like just this one entity is so bad, so evil that you have to, if you are Israeli, then you are like anti this and anti that. And I don't buy it.
Right.
So I get, and then also like again in the States, we have this issue with like we see this problem from thousands of miles away and we like know how to fix it. Or maybe we feel guilty here in the US because we're on stolen land, right? And that we're a
We say
country
that and we
who's
talk
who
about that.
yeah, we're a country whose economy started by slavery and I don't know, can't manage to elect a female president, right? When Israel had a female prime minister in the 70s. So I don't know. I mean, I think about that a lot too, especially like, I don't know, college campuses, particularly in California. And I'm always like, my God, California was fucking Mexico 100 years before Israeli independence, as was Texas.
Yeah.
Let's give it back.
Yeah.
Let's give it back.
I mean, a
Um,
lot of times it's easier to deal with, as you said, with a conflict that is thousands of miles away when you can't deal with the issues at home. And I mean, that's I had this argument with well, not argument conversation with this anti-Zionist, and I asked her like, okay, so if you're saying that we need to, and she lives in Ithaca in New York, her name is Ariel Gold, and I asked like, if you're saying that we need to leave Israel because we're on stolen land, you need to leave your country as well because you're on a burial site of Native Americans. Like, but the question is, where do you going to go back to? She said that because she has Sephardi roots, she thinks she's indigenous to Spain, which
Oh, shut the fuck up. Come on. Come on. Every single nation state is created on the backs of other people, right?
exactly
There is no country that is not experienced and that is not marginalized. I
right,
mean, Christ, here in the States, why don't you go to Flint, Michigan right now, where there are like literally black communities that don't have access to clean water, okay? Okay, like it's a joke. It's a
yeah,
joke.
yeah.
How many like what's the ratio of black men going to prison versus white? You think that that is like not systemic? I mean, it's totally messed up. And what am I saying right now? What is like the statute of limitation on land or cultural appropriation?
Mm,
Does it end here in the US
right.
because I like repost woke stuff all day long? No, I'm still privileged. Your friend in New York is still privileged.
She
Should
is
she go back to
she's so
Spain?
privileged.
I know, but everybody, we all do that, and we do it the worst here in the States as
Yeah.
well. We sit from 10,000 miles away and watch 3 minutes of the news and decide that we like know what's best for everybody else. It's freaking nonsense.
Yeah, but the point of the conversation on indigeneity is to understand where people come from. It's not to use it as a sword to push people away. It's not to understand the Jews, to recognize that Jews are indigenous to Judea, to Israel, doesn't mean that Palestinians shouldn't live there or that we should force them out or that Palestinians have no connection to this land, you know?
Of
It's
course,
just that's
of course, and that's the thing that I always like have issue with. It can't be one or the other, right? We as Jews and as humans and as Israelis
mhm,
cannot advocate for policies that are anti-equal rights. That is crazy.
exactly.
That is totally, totally insane. And that also has been done to us, and we can't do it.
Mhm,
And I'm not making a comparison to like Nazi
of course.
Germany and genocide. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that we can't sit by and say we're turning a different, all the Jewish values, all the this and that, all the outreach, all the tikkun olam that we live
Mhm,
and breathe, we're going to ignore because we're uncomfortable with like this part of our history or reality, right? You cannot do that. But that is not a reason to say that like Israel doesn't have the right to exist either. And if you look at like the machine, I mean, people in the States, we do this a lot too. We focus on the propaganda, or at least in our circles, right?
right,
Because we're also minorities in this whole thing as well. Like in our
right.
circles, I get really sensitive when people talk about Israeli propaganda. And I'm like, well, again, let's look at like then textbooks in like Saudi Arabia. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
Right.
there's propaganda everywhere, and there's certainly propaganda against Jews in Israel too, right?
Mhm,
And again, I get it. I know it while it's happening. You instrumentalize, you objectify, and you use this conflict as a way to sort of
divert
forget.
attention. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's like totally nonsense, but those are things that we have to accept. And again, in the States, especially because you look at how quickly sort of people cling on to an idea. And if, quite honestly, if I were probably not Israeli and maybe just a liberal Jew here in the US, I would maybe feel differently. I'd be more vocal
Mm,
about things. And not to say that I'm not vocal. I mean, I've basically been upfront about how I feel with any of this stuff. However,
yeah.
you know, I think that like your politics sort of on the outside, like totally mitigate the way that you think and feel about everything.
Yeah.
In the States, it's like, I don't know, it's silly. I guess it's the same thing in the UK. And I don't even know what France, I don't know what it would be like to be a Jew in
Mm.
France or to have
It's
Israeli
really hard. I
citizenship.
mean, 9 out of 10 French Jewish students just said last year that they have experienced anti-Semitism. So I believe it's the French Jewish community. But where do they escape? They come in mass numbers to Israel. So
Yeah.
that's the question that I always pose to anti-Zionists. I'm saying, okay, if you're an anti-Zionist, where should the Jewish community escape next time that a country turns on us? Where should we go?
Well, and it's also like this thing where it's like this idea that like anti-Semitism only started with like Zionism, and you're like,
Right.
absolutely not,
You wish.
I mean, like it's just like lazy. It's just not true. And you're like, oh, or even under Ottoman rule, it was so peaceful, and you're like, there weren't equal rights then either. What the fuck are you talking about? It doesn't even make sense. But like, so I think that people also have to stop that. And you're absolutely right. Where are we going to go? I'm not going to sit around and like wait on the idea that like perhaps all these people that have like publicly or politically called for my extermination. What do you think? If we're like, you know what, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we'll go to Uganda, right? And
But I mean, even in the West, when you see like Corbyn and you see other politicians getting power, you must ask yourself. And I have Jewish friends here that have thought about. I mean, I think 40% of British Jews were thinking about making Aliyah in case Jeremy Corbyn becomes the prime minister. So, like, we can't count on the goodwill of our brothers, of our non-Jewish fellows here that clearly don't have our best interests in heart. So of course we want to have an alternative, and we need not an alternative, but we need a safe haven. And it's not just because we need it, because we feel like we need it, but based on historic incidents
yeah,
that in every generation we were moved in wholesale numbers and killed and faced genocide in everywhere around the world, from Europe to everywhere we were.
we're like literally we've been practicing survival since day one. And
Yeah,
I
exactly.
remember, my mom used to lead Holocaust seminars in Pittsburgh, in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh,
Mm.
and you know, like there was like always the season that she would be like teaching these, and I'd always go into her basement, and she'd be like smoking like mentholated cigarettes, watching like Triumph of the Spirit, or like these like sort of like pre-Schindler's List Holocaust things. And it was like I went to a Solomon Schechter school, and I wrote my paper on partisan like uprisings and so on and so forth, and you get it crammed down your throat, and you're like, and it's true. It's because if you don't do that, like, who knows what's going to happen? We know what's going to happen. And I just feel like that is kind of what you have to do. And listen, it might sound paranoid, but I'm like, how many Holocaust deniers are there? Tons, tons, right?
Mm.
Tons. And I'm like, and I don't need to like, again, I don't need to like sit around and like wait for somebody to like help us out. It doesn't happen. It doesn't ever work, and it hasn't happened in thousands of years.
Yeah.
So, but that is why we do what we do, and that's why we advocate. And I also think that, as we talked about this before, and I'll continue to say it, when it comes to things like Israel, you're like either on one side or the other, and I just find that to be ridiculous. And
Yeah.
again, another sort of double standard. So it's important that we continue to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really hope we can do that again. I saw a few people ask about the movie. The documentary is, the name is In Search of Israeli Cuisine. You can find it on Amazon videos and other places online. And the restaurants, again, can you just tell people, because I'm sure everyone like me are going
Oh, good.
to look it up later. But yeah, go ahead.
So it's Zahav. It
Uh,
is Abe Fisher. It is Kfar or Kfar. My race is terrible. Kfar. It is Laser Wolf, Merkaz, Goldie, Dizengoff, Federal Donuts. Shachach. I said Merkaz, right? Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Well,
That's all.
later on, they can go also to your profile to make sure that they're checking each and every one of these restaurants. I'm gonna make a trip to Philly, and hopefully, again, if you know anyone that can help me get a table,
I
that would
got
be.
you. I got you. I got you.
Mike, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and for everything you're doing. You're an incredible leader in our community. So happy we have you. I mean, we all are just forever in debt for everything you're doing for our people, for our community, and bringing so much joy to the world with what you're doing. So thank you. Make sure everyone to follow Mike and to check the restaurants. And I can't wait to meet you in person soon, hopefully.
I know. Chen, thank you so much. Thank you so, so much. And I hope that everybody here follows you. I really feel like your voice is of the utmost importance right now. And I don't know, we'll hang out one of these days. Are you going back to Israel anytime soon or no?
Yeah, I'm going in May, at the end of May, for a wedding, but then I'm coming to America in like early June. So I'll be in touch with you. I will make the trip to Philly
All
to
right.
say
You have to now because I'll be super pissed off if you
hi. Promise, I
All
promise.
right. Chen, thank
Thank you so much. Make sure you save the video after that, okay? So I
All
can
right.
finish the
So
Got it.
I'm gonna X out of this, and then there'll
Yeah.
be a save option. I think I'll be okay. All right.
Okay. You got it.
Everybody
Good.
out there in Insta, guys, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for joining us, and we'll probably have to do this again, right?
Yeah. 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 For
All right.
sure.
But everybody follow Hen right now. All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
Mike. Talk soon.
See ya.